Hi, my name is Tracy Jensen, and this presentation is for Healthcare Management 4500. My presentation topic is Healthcare Management Controlling and Budgetary Approaches. Financial issues are primary importance of today's healthcare managers, said Gopinski and Pink of 2011. Another quote I have is, "The role that business operation managers play in improving a hospital's financial condition is a continuous and ever-increasing process," said Lingabeer 2008. Both of these quotes just support that the budget and controlling is very important in the role that it plays in healthcare and managing a healthcare organization or facility. Controlling a budget. The budget is the most widely used control device that we have. Having a budget in place leads to overall better planning. Planning is important to know how much you think you will need and to take into consideration possibilities for inflation or any sort of like remodeling or updating that needs to be done. It is important to consider previous year's plans when you think of costs and where they fall. Example is like if every 5 years you have to replace a certain piece of equipment, then you need to take into consideration that if you replaced it 4 years ago, that you're going to need to replace it in the next year. And one can decide how they want to spend their money. If they allow themselves a bigger budget, then they have more room for spending. Or if they just have a smaller budget, they need to know to be conservative. And this all comes down to like planning and knowing where you're going to spend your money. All aspects of the organization must be taken into consideration when formulating a budget. You must take into consideration every little department to know like how much you're going to spend. Budgets become important for managers to exert the control of the function. This goes back to if managers give their departments a lot of money to spend, then they're going to be able to control how much room they have for their spendings and their supplies. Important terms: controlling. This includes all tasks, monitor and track progress towards goals, ensure performance improvement, and to make corrective changes in strategy where necessary. Controlling aspect is extremely important to be able to control your budget, and so you know if you need to cut back or if you're not going to make a deadline. The budget needs to be closely monitored throughout the whole year. Budgeting, I have two different definitions for budgeting: the process of developing a plan and implementing it, and attempting to control outcomes so that they conform to or exceed the results called for by the plan. And also the process of converting or dollarizing the operating plan into monetary terms. All right. Cost controlling. The best way to control costs is one's spending is to establish the budget, and that goes back to the planning. If a budget is in place, then that's going to be the best way to control how much someone spends. If they manage their budget and they leave like a lot of room, then there's going to be little control. But if they make a tight budget, then it's going to have to be controlled like all the time. Always review monthly budgets short after receiving it in case there are any issues. This is important to notice if there's any sort of mistake in the budget, because if you wait too long, it's going to be hard to go back and notice that in 6 months or a year if you don't view it as soon as you get the statement. A quote here by Klein says, "Setting perspective limits on expenditures on healthcare is by definition the most effective means of controlling cost." And that's very true. If you set up a limit and say we're not going to go past this, then you have to control your spendings, and that's going to be the most effective tool. The 3 P's approach. There's pre-approach, proof, and publication. The pre-approach is a stage that consists of mostly things that need to take place before the budget is determined. Some examples according to Dunn are evaluate the facility's economics, economics climate, determine who your customers are and assess whether they're growing or declining, locate internal competitions for funds, establish a set of realistic budget expectations, and always start your budget planning a year in advance. The proof stage is always have a background information to support your budget and reasonings. Provide details and sources for your budget. Present past year's performances. Analyze and present applicable trends, data, and support the activity levels projected, and discuss current status prior to programs implementing and or goals assigned. These are important so you always are able to back up the reasoning for your budget, and if you have if you're going to need a lot for something, you need to be able to explain why you're going to need that money. The publication is be able to explain to others who view the budget why you made the decisions you did. So this goes back to the proofing to be able to do it, but you also need to be able to explain it. It is important to be able to back your decisions up. Some examples are, once the budget is approved, summarize for your supervisor the new and ongoing key organized programs. Update the status of each of these areas of the budget on a regular basis, and at least quarterly is important to update your supervisor. Here White just says the health programs are shaped by the decisions made in the budget process. This process is very important to not be overlooked and to spend a lot of time on it so that if there's anything that needs some problem arises, it can be fully addressed. Creating a budget. All levels of the management must include their input in the budget. You can't just leave a certain department out or a certain area of a hospital or healthcare facility and expect the budget to be on track. Every area needs to be included. A detailed list of previous year's expenses is needed. It's important to be able to look back and see if you spent a lot of money in one certain area. Maybe you can see why there was so much money, and if you need to include that in the upcoming year's budget, it's important to be able to look back. Preparing a budget can be extremely timely. You shouldn't just expect to be able to do this in a month or a couple weeks. You need to start it at the beginning of the year so that you have time and you are not crammed in making these decisions. Managers who are working on the budget must plan for problems to arise. You always have to have that little bit of comfort in your budget, knowing that if something comes up, that you'll be able to handle it and pay for it the way that it's needed. Approaches to budgeting. According to Dunn, he says that there's flexible budgeting and fixed, incremental, traditional or conventional budgeting, and zero-based budgeting. Flexible budgeting is prepared in the range of activity levels. It's used in all different levels of budget making, and this says that adjustments can be made throughout the year if changes in activity levels or according to activity levels. For example, a housekeeping department might have a laundry budget of $120 plus $12 per occupied bed per day. That's a flexible budget, saying that some months it may be more than others. A fixed budget is an example would be if you just get $1,200 a month and you don't get more depending on the amount of people that come through. So that's just an example. Conventional or traditional budgeting is a budget that assumes that budgeted amounts from the previous year remain set and attention only paid to incremental increases. So it's just a certain amount increases just each year, which can be really off if you're going to have new supplies or a new piece of equipment. So that's conventional and traditional budgeting. Incremental is often compared to flexible budget and assumes that the budgeted amounts from the previous year remain set and does not consider a one-time purchase. It just remains the same. Zero-based budgeting ignores the previous year's budget and requires that every request for funding be justified. It uses It's used in many corporations and healthcare organizations, and it gives administration an opportunity to reassess the activities, departments, and projects in terms for their benefits and costs of organization. And it takes a lot of time to plan for a zero-based budgeting. Budget types, there's the master budget, the operating budget, the capital budget, cash budget, and program budget. The master budget is a set of all major budgets in the organization. It generally includes the operating budget, programs budget, capital budget, and cash budget. It's just all of them combined into like the main master budget. The operating budget is a plan for the day in and day out operating revenues and expenses of all the organization, and is generally prepared for a period of 1 year at a time. The capital budget is also just did for 1 year at a time, and it is used to plan for the acquisitions and assets which have lives that are greater than 1 year. The cash budget is a plan for the cash receipts and cash distributions of the organization, and you must plan for cash inflows and outflows because it is important that the financial stability of the survival of the healthcare organizations. And the program budget is just for like a certain program or certain areas of a program, and it's the money that they need across the department and over like a long term. Cost cutting, there's reduction of salaries, a push for people to become more effective or right sizing, seeking the price relief from suppliers or competitive bidding, cutbacks in continuing education, and also layoffs. Reduction of salaries, sometimes if someone's job description changes, it's necessary to reduce their salary, or if they even are switched to like part-time versus they're not making the cutoff for full-time, it would be important to adjust their salary. It is always important to keep everyone effective. If maybe someone's overworking and you're having to pay them overtime, right sizing is important. And right sizing is adjustment of the staff numbers to match the workload, and it promotes efficiency. The seeking price relief from suppliers is competitive bidding is a process that compares prices from vendors in search for the best product, and it can lower total cost because you get the best deals. So that's an important thing that employers need to take into consideration when they're buying their supplies. Cutbacks for continuing education. If you're paying for your employees to go get a further degree or certification, maybe if it's necessary, you just say that you can't pay for that, but you still suggest that they get it. And layoffs as a last resort. If you're really needing to cut back, you can lay people off just so that it's less people to pay. A wrap up. The planning process and implementation of a budget is extremely important in the healthcare setting. Healthcare managers and leaders must be aware of how to control their budget and do their best to keep their total spendings on track. It's very important to have a budget in place and be able to monitor it and make sure you're making the right decisions. If you need to cost cut or right size, and you use the best type of budget that's right for your healthcare facility. And here there's a final quote. Many say that financial management is the most important predictor of whether a healthcare organizations will survive in the current competitive climate and beyond. One's control of budgeting can really play a role in whether their health facility is successful or not. And these are my resources that I used. And that is it. Thank you for watching.